For 300 years, one word could empty a monastery, silence a market town, and drain a kingdom's entire treasury. Northmen. History remembers them as savages, bearded chaos with axes, burning everything they touched. But that reputation is a marketing failure, because the people who wrote it down were the customers, and the Vikings weren't a mob, they were a business. Strip away the horned helmets they never actually wore, and what's left looks less like a barbarian horde and more like a venture operation. Sophisticated logistics, ruthless capital allocation, and a protection racket so well engineered that kings paid into it willingly for over a century. So to understand how a scattering of cold northern farms came to drain the wealth of a continent, you have to stop asking why the Vikings were so violent, and start asking what they were selling. Home, it turns out, was the problem. Scandinavia in the year 800 was a hard place to get rich. Thin soil, short summers, and too many suns for too little farmland to split between them. A young man with ambition and no inheritance had exactly two options: stay poor at home, or go find wealth somewhere it already existed. And the entire rest of Europe was somewhere it already existed. The only real question was how to reach it, and how to reach it faster than anyone who might try to stop you. The answer was a machine, the Longship. And it wasn't just a boat. It was the single most important piece of technology in the medieval North because it did something no other vessel on Earth could do. Every serious ship of the age was built around a trade-off. Deep-hulled cargo ships could cross the open ocean, but they needed deep harbors and drew far too much water to go inland. Flat little rivercraft could slip up a stream, but they'd be swallowed by a real sea. You picked one world, blue water or brown water, and the other one was closed to you. The Longship simply refused to pick. It was long and narrow and fast, its overlapping planks flexing with the waves instead of fighting them, and yet its draft, the depth it sat in the water, was barely deeper than a man's knee. It could ride out a North Atlantic storm, and then, days later, it could glide up a river so shallow that the people living there had never once thought to defend it. That is the whole secret, because every inland city in Europe had planned its safety around water. Their walls faced the roads. The river at their back wasn't a weakness. It was a moat, a guarantee, because everyone knew a seagoing ship simply couldn't come up it. The Vikings came up it, Paris, deep inland on the Seine, trade cities on the Volga and the Dnieper, 1,000 miles from any coast. And when the rivers ran out, the crews hauled the ships overland on logs to the next river and kept going. Places that, in their entire history, had never needed a wall on the waterside, waking up to dragon-proud hulls sitting in the shallows. In business terms, they had achieved total market penetration. A rival's fortress is only a moat if the attacker agrees to play by the expected rules of access. The Longship broke the rules of access. It reached markets no competitor could reach, which meant for a while the Vikings didn't have to compete for the wealth of Europe at all. They held a near monopoly on the simple ability to go and take it, and they ran it like a business. A raid was not a berserk frenzy of bloodlust, it was a venture. Someone had to front the capital, the ship, the iron, the provisions, all of it enormously expensive. A crew signed on not for wages, but for a share of whatever came back, their payout tied directly to the return. High risk, high reward. Losses were written off, and winnings were plowed straight back into more ships and bigger expeditions. This is venture capital in chainmail. Pool the money, spread the risk across many voyages, and chase the one outsized exit that pays for all the rest. And the easiest early exits were the softest targets. Monasteries. Undefended, unarmed, and absolutely stuffed with portable wealth, gold, silver, jeweled reliquaries, precisely because nobody had ever imagined an enemy arriving by way of the river. The first raids were almost pure profit. But raw plunder has a problem. It doesn't compound. You can only loot the same monastery once. So the smartest operators evolved. The very same ships that carried raiders could just as easily carry cargo. And the Vikings built a trade network that stretched from the coast of North America all the way to the markets of Baghdad. Furs, amber, walrus ivory, iron, and the era's single most valuable commodity. Enslaved human beings, captured on the raids and sold south by the tens of thousands. They founded trading towns, hubs like Hedeby and Burka, where the goods of the north changed hands for Arab silver. To this day, farmers in Sweden still turn up hordes of silver coins, minted 2,000 miles away in Baghdad. Raiding opened the routes. Trade turned those routes into a permanent income stream. But the true masterpiece, the single most elegant product these people ever engineered, was neither the raid nor the trade. It was the invoice. It was called the Danegeld. Instead of attacking a kingdom, the Vikings would offer, for a price, not to. Pay us in silver, and we will take our fleet somewhere else this year. And a king facing an enemy that could appear in any river at any time with no warning at all had a brutal piece of math to do. He could gamble everything on a fight, or he could simply pay to make the problem disappear until spring. Kings paid. England paid, and then paid again and again. In 991, it handed over 10,000 pounds of silver. Within 20 years, that annual bill had climbed past 30, then 40,000, one of the largest transfers of wealth in all of early medieval Europe. And here is the genius of the design. The Danegeld was never a one-time ransom. It was a subscription. The threat did not go away when the silver was paid, it renewed. Pay this year, and the fleet simply returns next year with a larger invoice, because now they know that you will pay. The Vikings had taken their own raw capacity for violence and turned it into recurring revenue. They got paid whether they lifted an axe or not. Now think about what all that silver actually did. It bought more ships. More ships meant more reach. More reach meant more kingdoms who would rather pay than fight, which meant still more silver, which bought still more ships. The raid funded the fleet. The fleet enabled the trade. The trade and the threat together funded the Danegeld, and the Danegeld bought a bigger fleet. For 150 years, that flywheel simply spun faster and faster, and the silver of an entire continent drained steadily northward. So why isn't this video being narrated in Old Norse? Because no moat lasts forever, and this one had a fatal flaw baked into it. It was built on a temporary technological gap, and gaps eventually always close. Europe learned. Kings began to fortify the rivers, building bridges deliberately low across the water to physically block the longships, walling their towns on every side instead of just the landward one. When the Vikings besieged Paris, the city's fortified bridges held them on the river for nearly a year. The undefended monastery became the exception, not the rule. And the deepest change of all was the quietest. The Vikings themselves settled down. They took the silver and the land and became Normans and dukes and Christian kings. The raiders slowly turned into the very establishment they had once plundered, until, in a final irony, it was the descendants of Vikings who conquered England in 1066. This time as its new lords. The technology spread, the targets hardened, the operators went legitimate, and the extraordinary returns compressed right back down to ordinary. The moat was never really stormed. It simply stopped being a moat. But look closely at the shape of what happened here, because that shape repeats. For a few centuries, a small group of people owned one piece of technology that let them reach a market everyone else was locked out of. And for as long as that gap stayed open, they did not compete for the world's wealth. They dictated the terms of it. The axes and the dragon ships and the burning halls were only ever the theater. The real story was always the shallow keel, the quiet, unglamorous tool that could reach what no rival could. And that exact shape. Proprietary technology, paired with a distribution advantage nobody can copy fast enough, is still, a full 1,000 years later, the single most powerful structure in all of business. The names change. The keel does not. And the entire game, then as now, is learning to spot that structure early, while the moat is still wide, and long before the rest of the world learns to fortify the river. This video is sponsored by MoatScope. Everything we just covered on proprietary technology and a distribution advantage nobody can copy fast enough is simple in theory. Actually finding those companies, that's the hard part. That's exactly what MoatScope is built for. It rates thousands of stocks on the two things that matter most: how strong the moat is and how much you'd pay for it. quality times valuation on one simple scorecard, so you can spot the widening moats that are actually trading at a fair price. Check out MoatScope at the link below and go find your next compounder.